Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to episode number 40 of the Facts Over Feelings podcast. I am Trevor Kaufman. I'm once again joined with Ryan Marister. And Ryan, I never miss an opportunity to show off the guns. Anyways, we have a
Oh my
very
God.
busy podcast for you guys. We got a lot of NFL free agency to talk about, including a big splash today with J.J. Watt going to a team we'll talk about in a second. And then we got a little bit of NBA to talk about, some All Star Snubs, and a couple teams that Ryan and I have been watching closely and want to talk a little bit more in depth later on in the podcast.
Mm.
Ryan, I will toss it to you, however, to get us going with the J.J. Watt to the Arizona Cardinals deal. 2 years, $31 million, $23 million guaranteed. I love this deal, but I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, when I heard about this deal, it came out of the blue to me. I was really surprised because all I was hearing, Trevor, the last couple weeks, last few
Mm-hmm.
days was, okay, Green Bay, he's gonna go to a winner. He's gonna go to a team that can make a Super Bowl. Buffalo.
Cliff Kingsbury will lead us there. Anyways, go ahead.
Buffalo was an option. Cleveland was mentioned. A lot of these teams that are contenders for the Super Bowl. And then he went to the Cardinals, kind of out of the blue. And honestly, it's a solid signing for the Cardinals. If you look strictly at the player, the Cardinals, we talked about this. They needed a defensive lineman to go along with Chandler Jones. Chandler Jones is a great pass rusher, but any great pass rusher could want some help on the other side, and have JJ Watt on the opposite side. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better second defensive end. So, player wise, this fits really well. I think that both of these guys are going to wreak havoc if they're healthy on the opposing team's quarterback and their offensive lines. But that was the catch right there. If they're healthy, this is a concern for me. It's because JJ Watt's 32. He's had season-ending injuries 3 of the last 5 seasons, and they're pretty major injuries. Out for months on end due to these injuries in multiple seasons, 2016, 2017, and 2019. So it's happened quite a bit recently, and that just kind of gives me a little bit of concern, especially when the Cardinals end up giving him $23 million guaranteed over 2 years. I just think that's a little bit too much. Especially with a team that has some other holes that they want to fill. If I were the Cardinals, I maybe would have wanted to pay a little less. But, to be fair, the Cardinals did pay less than other teams were offering. There was news that the Browns and the Packers were offering more, and J.J. Watt took less for the Cardinals. So, I mean, I guess kudos to the Cardinals for getting him for less. But if I were the Cardinals, I'd just be a little bit wary of, his injury history and the fact that, they did give him a lot of guaranteed money for a guy going into his age 33 season.
I completely disagree with the idea that we overpaid him. And I'm not even joking. I'm actually being dead serious, and here's why.
Okay.
10 edge rushers in the NFL now make at least $17 million in average annual salary. 34 make at least $10 million in average annual salary. So for me, J.J. Watt, according to the market, according to what other people are being paid at his position, we didn't overpay him at all. We're giving him $11 million in guaranteed, and he will at most make $15.5 million a year, which is not even the highest. I mean, there's 10 people getting paid more than that. So for me, he is a little bit old. He has had injury problems. I trust, and I can't make a prediction on this trade based on the what if he'll get injured again.
Yeah, of course.
Right? I just gotta see it as J.J. Watt, the player. And this guy has won Defensive Player of the Year multiple times. He is arguably a Hall of Famer. He doesn't have the team accolades, obviously, because he's been stuck in Houston for most of his career, or maybe his whole career. I actually don't know.
Career. Yep, whole career.
Yeah, his whole career. And now he's coming to an Arizona team that I think the most suspect part of this Arizona team is the coaching staff. I don't think there's a lot of holes on the offense. We're going to definitely need a receiver, especially if Larry Fitzgerald retires, which that is certainly a possibility. But we'll see now. This might fluctuate that decision a little bit. And obviously the defense isn't perfect, but I think the defense, if the secondary gets a little bit of a boost, is really good, because I do think this front seven, especially if Isaiah Simmons is going to predominantly play linebacker, I do think this is a very solid front seven. And if it can stay healthy and not have to rotate so many bodies, I do think this will be a top 10 NFL defense this upcoming season.
Wow.
So for me, I love the J.J. Watt trade as an Arizona Cardinals fan. I think we have 2 of the best edge rushers in the game now, and I think we might have the best D-line in the game. I think the Rams are close, but with Chandler Jones and J.J. Watt, that is going to be a problem for 17 offensive lines next year. And I don't want to say the Cardinals are going to win the division yet, but I definitely think this is a playoff team. I would hope this is a playoff team. You wouldn't sign a guy like J.J. Watt if you didn't think you were going to be a playoff team. But I'm really excited. And I want to mention one more thing.
Yeah.
I really think DeAndre Hopkins had a huge part of this. DeAndre Hopkins put it on social media, the edited photo of JJ in a black Cardinals jersey. It went viral. And a lot of people are like, yeah, that's his buddy from Houston. Didn't really seriously consider Watt, to potentially land in Arizona. And here he is. And I can't help but think DeAndre Hopkins helped make that happen. I'm sure he called him multiple times, talked him into coming to Arizona. Because you're right, Ryan. He was getting offered more money at what you would think are better teams. Buffalo almost went to the Super Bowl. Green Bay almost went to the Super Bowl. Cleveland won a playoff game. So the fact that he turned down money for a team that had a worse year last year is a little bit interesting. Yeah. And you have to think DeAndre Hopkins played a part in that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a fair point. And, I'm sure he did play a part in it. But I think that I would assume that J.J. Watt's looking past his NFL career at this point and like where he wants to end up after football is over, because I just don't see any reason to pass up a place like Green Bay over Arizona. I mean, maybe I'm crazy, but if you're looking strictly from a football standpoint, like not money, not location, not like coaching staff or like comfort level, whatever. I feel like Green Bay is a better place, but I guess he just felt drawn to Arizona for some other reasons outside of strictly like a chance of winning a Super Bowl perspective. So, it was just surprising to me. But there's two things I want to say before we move on from this, and you can say one more thing after this if you'd like. But I wanted to say, this is a big year for Cliff Kingsbury. This signing, Trevor, this kind of shows Kingsbury and all Cardinals fans that the front office is laying it all on the line for these next few seasons. And if Kingsbury can come up big and they can make the playoffs, win a couple playoff games, he'll stay and he'll flourish. But if Kingsbury comes out here, another flat season, makes a couple bad mistakes in the end of games and play calling decisions or just game time decisions with timeout management, things like that, your fourth down calls, then I don't know if he'll stay after this year. I think he could get fired this year if the Cardinals miss the playoffs. I really do.
He will be fired this year. Yeah. I will call for his head if we don't make the playoffs this year.
I think it's playoffs or bust for the Cardinals right now, and as it should be. They're a talented team.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, it's not just make the wild card game and lose. We need to win a playoff game this year. You don't sign it. You are wasting money on J.J. Watt if you do not win at least the playoff game.
Yeah.
Ideally, I want to call us Super Bowl contenders. I don't think we are. I'm not going to go that far yet. I do think we have magic, and I think if Kyler Murray can play at the level he was playing at the first half of the season last year, then we'll see. But for right now, you bring in a guy like J.J. Watt, all the pressure is going to be on Cliff Kingsbury and Vance Joseph because there's no excuses. You have the talent now. You have the roster. You have playmakers at almost or maybe even every position.
Almost every position.
There are holes on the team, but what NFL team doesn't have holes, right? There is no perfectly constructed NFL team. That does not exist because of the hard cap. So for me, that's fair because they won the Super Bowl, maybe. But they have holes.
Yes.
But anyways, all the pressure is going to be on Kingsbury and Vance Joseph. If we don't make the playoffs, even if we lose in the wild card, I want both of them fired. Unless like some crazy circumstances happen where we have a bunch of injuries. But for me, it's playoffs or bust. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, and that's fair. I think it should be playoffs or bust, from a coaching perspective and from a team perspective. But before we move on, I wanted to say one thing that's concerning to me about J.J. Watt is he only has, Trevor, one season in the last 5 years of double-digit sacks. And to me...
Well, you said he's had 3 season-ending injuries.
Yeah, I know. But that contributes.
That has a lot to do with it.
Oh, that's a massive reason for that. but I'm just saying, last year he played all 16 games. He only had 5 sacks. So I don't know. I'm hoping for the Cardinals as a team that he comes out, stays healthy, and plays like he did his entire career. He is a Hall of Famer. He's a future Hall of Famer. Trevor, you're exactly right. He's one of the best defensive ends we've ever seen. Had 20 sacks in multiple seasons. That's unbelievable. But we'll see what happens. If he can stay healthy, I think it'll be worth it. But if he can't stay healthy, I just say that I wish they didn't give him so much guaranteed money. But I don't know if you have any final thoughts before we move on.
I do. The vibes right now in Arizona are quite high. I got my Phoenix Suns jersey on. I'll mention them a little bit later on in the podcast. But Arizona sports has turned a corner, and I really, really hope I see multiple playoff appearances for my Suns this year and my Cardinals next year, Ryan. But I wanted to throw that in there. I thought it would be fitting just
Okay.
because we signed J.J. Watt.
Yeah.
Might want to throw that in there
Sure.
just for people to hear.
Alrighty. We'll see if Arizona can finally make the playoffs after seemingly decades of missing the playoffs. I can't even remember the last time they did well in the playoffs. But with that, Trevor, we can move on to kind of a different focus in the NFL and more of an overview of the upcoming NFL free agency period, Trevor, which starts 2 weeks from the filming of this podcast on March 1st. It will commence March 15th. And teams will be able to talk and sign players starting then. So, with free agency looming, we wanted to talk about a few players in this free agency class that we were interested in and like where we think they should go or where they can go. And Trevor, I wanted to turn this over to you and have you talk about a player or two that you are interested in seeing where they fall. I mean, is there anyone in particular?
Yeah, I actually want to talk about a guy that you wouldn't think might be leaving the place he's at right now, but you never really know because of recent news. I'm going to talk about Dak Prescott, and obviously we've heard over these last maybe almost 2 years now the contract talks with management, how those have gone horribly to say the least. Dak getting franchise tagged this year, the absurd amount of money he wants. So for me, the Dallas Cowboys, right? All of a sudden you hear a guy named Russell Wilson went out of Seattle. And there have been multiple large talking heads in sports, Colin Cowherd being one of them, who said Dallas should go all in on getting a guy like Russell Wilson. So what would that mean for Dak Prescott? I don't know. Ultimately, I do think Dak Prescott would stay in Dallas, but I do have a theory where if Russell Wilson did end up going to the Cowboys, I could see Dak Prescott either maybe being traded to a team like Seattle or going to a team like the Miami Dolphins, where you didn't see a lot from Tua. You're not really in position to get a quarterback in this draft to replace him after 1 year. I think Dak Prescott is more than capable of leading a well-coached and a well-ran team like the Miami Dolphins with Brian Flores. For me, that's just a bit of an interesting theory. They have a lot of cap room. They have a lot of potential. They have an elite defense. They would definitely need some receivers. I've definitely heard that Allen Robinson could be a potential target for them as well in free agency. But for me, I'm just throwing kind of out this is like a hunch theory. I don't think this will happen. Dak Prescott to Miami, I could see it only because I've heard rumblings of Russell Wilson maybe going to the Cowboys, which I don't really like that move for them. I actually think they should re-sign Dak. But, just theory of mine, and I thought, Ryan, maybe I get your thoughts on the Dak Prescott situation.
Yeah, real quick, I'll touch on it for a second. I think obviously it's unlikely. I think quarterbacks don't move very often, but if they did, it's a really interesting thing to talk about because Dak Prescott, Trevor, I think that him and Russell Wilson could have a little team swap. And I think this could work out for both of them if they did this. Russell Wilson wants a good offensive line. He's tired of bad offensive lines. He's tired of just the grind of the rough weather in Seattle, just getting pounded every game, getting hit constantly. And he wants to be, safer behind his line. He wants to trust his line. And he can't do that in Seattle right now. He hasn't been able to do it for years. In Dallas, he could do that. Dallas has an elite offensive line. As we've said for years, they have a top 5 offensive line, as they've had for many years now. And I think that Wilson would love it there. Obviously, they have an elite offense. The receivers are out of this world. The O-line's great. Zeke is obviously a very good running back. I think Wilson would fit great there. The question is, would Dak fit in Seattle? And I think the answer is also yes, because I think Dak wants to be believed in by the front office. And I think Seattle would be willing to pay him a lot of money. I think Seattle wants to remain relevant if they get rid of Wilson. And it's a big if, big if. But if they did, they'd want to remain relevant in playoff contention. And I think that getting Dak would do that because you have Dak with DK and Tyler Lockett. You're automatically a playoff contender. And, who knows if they could get some running back help, get some O-line help. That would be an elite offense even without Russell Wilson. So I think it's a quarterback swap there would be something to think about, something interesting. But in regards to your Miami thing, I think that Dak could also go to Miami. I think any good quarterback would want to go to Miami at this juncture. Deshaun Watson, right? Dak Prescott, Russell Wilson, even any of them would fit well in Miami because Miami has an elite defense and a solid coaching staff. All they need is a few weapons on that offense. And you mentioned Allen Robinson. So, it's really interesting to see if anyone goes there. But I think Dak and Russell Wilson switching spots, switching teams is an interesting thought.
Absolutely. But enough there on Dak Prescott. I know, Ryan, you have a player or two you want to talk about,
I
so
do.
go ahead.
Yeah, no, I
Floor is
wanted to.
yours.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about a guy that we've all forgotten about, Trevor Von Miller, and he was hurt this past year, missed the whole season.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's crazy how 1 year out of the league, a lot of people forget about you. Von Miller is probably a future Hall of Famer, one of the best linebackers slash DNs in Denver history in football in his generation, no doubt. Double-digit sacks every season except for 2019, and he's elite. So where could he go? There's a few places I think that Von Miller would fit really well. He's 31 right now, almost 32, so it's around JJ Watt's age. I think he will be paid less than JJ Watt. So I think that's already enticing to a lot of teams. And I think that two teams stand out to me for Von Miller, and that's Tennessee and Cleveland. Both of these teams have terrible linebacking cores. Both of these teams need pass rush outside of one player, Jadeveon Clowney and Myles Garrett, respectively, right? The Titans even won, I think, a game or two without a single sack. I mean, this team struggled so badly to get sacks. So Von Miller would fit perfectly in Tennessee. I think that that'd be a really nice signing for a couple of years. I also think he'd fit really well in Cleveland for obvious reasons. They have a few other good pass rushers, and I think Von Miller there would fit really, really well at the right price point. So both of these teams could use Von Miller, and if he's healthy, ready to go, I think that he'd be a great fit in both of those spots.
I actually really like both those teams that you just mentioned there, Ryan. The Tennessee one I didn't even think of, so that was a really good thought.
Yeah.
I'm going to actually go back to a team that we just talked about, and I'm going to go to the Seattle Seahawks. And we've already mentioned their troubles. Russell Wilson now is not super happy. And I think a great way to try and keep him in Seattle is to sign a guy like Von Miller to help bolster that defense. You bring in a guy like Carl's done that midseason last year. You bring in Jamal Adams, bring in a guy like Von Miller, and I think Seattle is all in on next season to potentially become to become a Super Bowl contender once again. And I think that would be a move that I think if I'm Russell Wilson, I'd be like, yeah, okay, maybe I should stay here. Like if he wants to win, I think that would be, I think Seattle's a good place to stay, especially if they sign Von Miller. Their defensive line took a little bit of a step back last year. They didn't have quite the pass rush they've had in the past. Their defense in general wasn't as good as it got better throughout the season, but it was not as good as it's been in the past. And I think bringing in an elite edge rusher, an elite outside linebacker in Von Miller would really help that team out. And I think it would really, really make that team a very strong football team two ways. I think they would have obviously they would have an excellent offense, which they already do. And I think it would really help out their defense because bringing in Von Miller would give them elite talent at every level, at the line, linebacking core, and in the secondary.
Yeah, I mean, there you go. I think that Seattle is definitely a good spot for Von Miller. And, I mean, he could go a multitude of places. I think he'd fit really well as a pass rush specialist, and he still has some left in the tank as he is only 31 years old. But, Trevor, there's one other player you wanted to talk about, and he's a star receiver. So take it away. Where do you think Allen Robinson will land?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of teams that would be interested in a guy like Allen Robinson. He has shown flashes of being an elite receiver, but he has been stuck with Blake Bortles and Mitchell Trubisky for most of his career, so he hasn't been able to really show what he can do. And I think it's time for him to go to an organization with an elite quarterback, right? I know Miami has been floated around because they have the cap space.
Sure.
But for me, I think Allen Robinson would fit very nicely. And they don't even have an elite quarterback. I guess an elite play caller.
Okay.
I think Allen Robinson would fit very nicely in San Francisco with Kyle Shanahan. I know I kind of just contradicted myself. I said maybe you should go with an elite quarterback. But hear me out. Kyle Shanahan brings out the best in Jimmy Garoppolo. They already have George Kittle. Deebo Samuel and Ayuk are nice, but I really think neither of them are elite number one receivers. We'll see what Ayuk can turn into. And I think bringing in a guy like Allen Robinson would really bolster that offense. And look, they went to the Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo without Ayuk and without Allen Robinson. So I really think bringing him in, getting Kittle healthy, getting the defense healthy, I really think he could make San Francisco into a tough out in the NFC next season.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a good spot for him. I do think that he could fit there because I think Debo, I really question his durability. He's been hurt
Mhm.
constantly in his career. He comes back for a couple weeks, he re-injures a hamstring, he breaks a
Mhm.
foot. His legs, they seem like they get injured constantly, and I think that's a
Mhm.
concern for a young guy. So that's definitely an option for San Fran. You know, I really think there's a few other places for Allen Robinson. There's a few places that stand out to me personally. And the first one, if you're looking strictly from a team perspective, I think the Patriots need a guy like Allen Robinson. Now, Allen Robinson really wouldn't, I don't know why he'd necessarily want to go there. I mean, I know they have
Mhm.
Bill Belichick, obviously the greatest coach of all time, or one of. Obviously, they have a solid defense still, but they don't
Mhm.
have a quarterback. I mean, Cam Newton's sadly a shell of
A shell of
himself.
himself,
And
right?
it's really sad to watch. I feel bad for the guy because he was elite back in the day, back a few years back. But Allen Robinson would be a perfect fit for the Patriots. They need a big-bodied receiver on the outside who can make contested catches. They don't have that at all. They have a bunch of small guys. Jacoby Myers is as good as they have right now, and he's a small receiver who can make some catches over the middle. But by no means can he make like catches on vertical go routes on the sidelines. So
Mhm.
they need a guy like Alvin Robinson on that team. But I think a better fit, a team that I think would actually be really interesting for Allen Robinson is the Cincinnati Bengals, Trevor. I think this would be a really interesting fit because AJ Green is a free agent. And obviously, AJ Green and Joe Burrow didn't really mesh. He threw the ball to him a lot. Joe Burrow did. It just wasn't really, the completion percentage was low between the two. I think it was somewhere in the low 40s, maybe in high 30s. It was really, really low
Mhm.
between the two of them. So obviously they didn't really connect, and then Burrow got hurt. I think Allen Robinson, along with T. Higgins, is a really, really nice duo. And then with Tyler Boyd in the slot, I mean, you're giving Burrow three elite weapons, arguably.
Mhm.
So I think that that'd be a really interesting fit, barring, obviously assuming they have the cap for it. So I think that Cincy would be really intriguing. And I think it would push that team to another level on the offensive side, as long as they got a few O linemen in the draft or in free agency.
I really like that Cincy idea. I actually never would have thought of that in a million years, if
Mm.
I'm being completely honest. And I think the most important thing you can do, especially if you're Cincinnati, is I think most importantly, one is get your offensive line solidified. You saw what happened to your quarterback last year. And number two is provide him as many weapons as possible. We're seeing with these young quarterbacks, my Arizona Cardinals did the same thing. They bring in an elite receiver like DeAndre Hopkins. Why not, if I'm Cincinnati, try and bring in an elite receiver like Allen Robinson? And you saw what T. Higgins can do last year.
Yeah.
Tyler Boyd is a very capable receiver as well. Why not give Joe Burrow the best possible situation to succeed, especially since he's only going to be in his second year and he's coming off a serious injury? So I really do think that's an interesting thought, Ryan, and an interesting thought for Allen Robinson. You might not necessarily think because of Cincinnati over the last few years, going there, you're
Yep.
going to be losing a lot of games, but
Mm.
it seems like they have their quarterback, if he can get back to what he was, which I think he will.
I think he will.
And they have a couple, nice guys outside of Allen Robinson where he won't probably have to be double teamed every game. So
Exactly.
interesting thought there. But with that, I believe that covers our, or no, you have one more player you want to talk about, right?
Yeah, I was going to talk about one more player real quick, Trevor,
Yeah, go
if you
ahead.
don't
Sorry
mind.
about that.
No,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
fine. And I want to talk about Corey Davis for a brief second. And this is an interesting player, Trevor, because he had a great year in Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
People were skeptical. Would he fail in the NFL? He was drafted pretty high. He didn't play great his first season, only 375 yards. But he stepped up this past year, Trevor. He had almost 1,000 yards. He was 16 yards off from a 1,000-yard season. 15 yards per reception. That's a career high. 71% catch rate, also a career high. 11 yards per target, also a career high. He had a great season. He was catching balls down the field. He was catching them
Mm-hmm.
efficiently, and he just flourished in Tennessee's offense. I think that he could very well stay in Tennessee. I think that might be the best fit for him. But there was a spot that stood out to me, Trevor, and it was because he's a cheaper option than some of these top of the line receivers like Chris Godwin
Mm-hmm.
and Allen Robinson. And that's
Mm-hmm.
Arizona. I think he could fit really well on this Cardinals team. I think they need a second receiver. Even if Fitzgerald stays, they still
I
need a second
agree.
receiver. And I think along with DeAndre Hopkins, he'll get double teamed. And to exploit those double teams, you need a capable, solid receiver. And Corey Davis is that. He runs great routes over the middle, a lot of just off play action, a lot of post routes over the middle, and he catches a lot of them down the field and efficiently, like I said. So I think he'd fit really well with a guy like Kyler running play action. I think that
Mm-hmm.
he'd be a good addition for the team, and he'd be more cost effective than some of the top end receivers.
I like that. I agree with you. Arizona definitely does need a second receiver to complement DeAndre Hopkins. We saw at times last year, Christian Kirk, Andy Isabella really struggle. So I would be very happy if they brought in a guy like Corey Davis, who I think will be very successful wherever he goes. Even if he stays in Tennessee, I think he'll have another really solid year. I want to throw out another kind of wild card destination,
Okay.
and I think this would be an interesting fit just because of the roster of receivers this team has. And I'm going to go with the Las Vegas Raiders. And here's why. They don't have they don't have like a reliable big body receiver that's like a big physical receiver like Corey
It's
Davis,
true.
right?
Yep.
They have Nelson Aguilar. They have a guy like Hunter Renfro. They do have Darren Waller, who's obviously a tight end, not a receiver.
Yep.
But I think bringing in a guy like Corey Davis, who's more of a big, physical, tough receiver, I think will help open up some of these other guys like Henry Ruggs and open up more plays for guys like Hunter Renfro and even open up more opportunities for Darren Waller, who had a terrific year last year. And I still believe in Derek Carr. I believe in John Gruden kind of. I don't love what he's done roster wise, but I do believe in Derek Carr. I think he had a pretty okay year last year,
Yeah.
and I think bringing in a big receiver, another targets, someone for him to throw to outside of average receivers at best, I think would really benefit him and benefit this Raiders offense in general, which has a pretty solid offensive line and a very nice young running back in Josh Jacobs. So for me, I think Corey Davis Las Vegas would be an interesting spot.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, they definitely need a bigger body receiver, as you said. And Davis is bigger than those other guys on that team, so
Mm-hmm.
he would definitely fit pretty solidly. And I think with a guy like Derek Carr, who likes to throw intermittent passes, he doesn't throw deep all that much, I would say he'd fit really well. So, I think there's some interesting decisions for a lot of these free agents, Trevor. And we'll see coming in 2 weeks where these guys go. I know we'll talk more about this next week with that looming in 2 weeks. But with that, Trevor, we wanted to move on to the other sport in the sports world in America right now, and that is the NBA. We wanted to talk about the NBA for obvious reasons. Season's in full swing, almost to the All-Star break. And speaking of the All-Star break, we've actually made it to the point where the All-Stars have been chosen. They have been selected.
Mm-hmm.
And Trevor, I wanted to swing this over to you and ask you, were there any All-Stars that stood out to you that really didn't deserve to be there, or All-Star selections that, were there snubs? Were there players that deserved to be there that weren't? Just give me some thoughts on that.
It's hard, right? Because every year, and I'm a victim of this too, because my guy gets snubbed quite a bit. But every year, there's always outrage about this guy got snubbed, that guy got snubbed. And I think the $1 million question is who would he replace? And for me, after the injury corrections, right? Booker replaces Anthony Davis, Sabonis replaces Kevin Durant, I believe.
Sure.
For me, I think they got it mostly right. I mean, you could argue Bam Adebayo, but Julius Randle and Sabonis have just as good, if not better, stats than Bam Adebayo. And if I'm going to the Western Conference, getting Booker in was the right thing to do. I don't think Anthony Davis. He was actually probably the one guy. Him and Chris Paul weren't really having all-star caliber years. Davis had missed like 9 or 10 games, and his stats weren't spectacular. He was averaging like 21 or 22 points a game. And same thing with Chris Paul. And I'm a huge Chris Paul fan. I loved what he's done for the Suns, but I don't know if he's had that all-star caliber year. I think he's brought out the best in some other guys, which is great, but I don't know if that means he's an individual all-star himself. Don't get me wrong, Chris. I love what you're doing. Thank you for changing the culture in Phoenix. But for me, I do think Bam Adebayo was one of the biggest snubs. You could argue him over Sabonis. You could argue him over Randall, but it's really back and forth. And I'm struggling because there's just so many good players in the NBA, and there's only 24 All-Stars every year, and it just shows you how talented the association is right now.
Yeah.
So for me, Devin Booker, they got him in after the injury. Sabonis, they got him in after the injury. I think for the most part, it's pretty right. And obviously, there's some arguments. I made a list of the top 5 snubs that you can make like an all snub team. I'll pull that up. I have Bam Adebayo, DeMar DeRozan, Trae Young, Brandon Ingram, and Jimmy Butler. Those are 5 guys I thought you could really make an all-star snub team, and that'd be a solid lineup right there. But I really think for the most part, it's pretty right. But I'll hand it off to you, Ryan. What do you think?
Yeah, so Trevor, there's a few things that I actually have an issue with in regards to these All-Star selections. And the first thing is I get that they corrected their mistake with Devin Booker when
Right.
Anthony Davis was ruled out, but the fact that Chris Paul made it over Devin Booker was just absolutely ridiculous to me. In no
Yeah.
way in no way did Chris Paul play better on the court than Devin Booker this season. He simply didn't in almost every statistical category. Sure, he had more assists. Sure, he shot a little bit more efficiently from the floor, but Booker undoubtedly is the better player on the floor right now.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe if Chris Paul was in his prime, that'd be a different story. But Chris Paul's not as good as Devin Booker right now, so I thought that was a little disrespectful to Booker.
It was.
But because you can't really put a guy in the All-Star game for what they do off the floor. And that's why Chris Paul's so valuable to the Suns. I mean, we've talked about this at length, Trevor, and I think that's why he's so valuable for this team.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean he should make the All-Star game. So I wanted to point that out. I was just disappointed that it took them, Anthony Davis getting hurt to correct their mistake. I didn't like that. But in regards to the snubs, Trevor, I think the only real snubs lie in the East. And for me, there's not many players that I think deserved it over the players that made it in, but I think that Bam Adebayo, I think he deserved to make it in, Trevor. I do. I really do. And here's why.
Who would he replace? Who do you replace?
I'd have Bam Adebayo replace Julius Randle. And I know people will say, wow, Julius Randle's having a great year. And he is. He has 23 points per game, Trevor. And
11 rebounds, 5.5 assists.
He's averaging 11 rebounds, 5.5 assists. He's shooting 42% from three. But I think Bam Adebayo is the better player. And I think that he's a better defender. I think that he's averaging almost as many points on less minutes. They have the exact same number of assists, almost identical rebounds, but he's more efficient shooting the ball from the floor. And I think that to me is the difference. I know Julius Randle hits threes and Bam Adebayo doesn't, but I think Bam Adebayo is more efficient from the floor. I think he's better on both ends of the floor combined, and I think that his team's better. Keep in mind, Bam Adebayo's team was missing their best player, Trevor, for most of the season. And Julius Randle is the number one option for New York. So it's a little bit different, right? When you're the number one guy on a defensive focused team. The Knicks, Tom Thibodeau run teams are generally defensively focused. So when you're the number one guy, you're an offensive minded guy on a defensive team, you're going to get a lot of opportunities. And I just think that Bam Adebayo has kept Miami team in the playoff hunt, and now they're back in the top 8 with Jimmy Butler healthy. And I think he deserves credit for that. I think he does. And I would put him in over Julius Randle, although they have seemingly nearly identical stats. And Julius Randle might have slightly better stats in certain categories, but I think Bam Adebayo is a better overall player. I think he proved it last year and this year, and I think he's better on both ends of the floor. I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Here's what I'll say. I do think Bam Adebayo. Actually, here's why I disagree.
Okay.
I think Julius Randle just this year is playing better than it's close, but he's having a better year than Bam Adebayo this year. And I look at the Knicks. And I look at this roster and I go, why is this team the 4th seed in the East? Now they're only one game above 500. I get that, but they're the 4th seed in the East and they're 18-17. And they've had a huge comeback this year compared to where they've been the last few years. And I look at a guy like Julius Randle, who has to do everything. I mean, he's leading them in scoring. I'm pretty sure he's leading them in rebounding. And I don't think he's leading them in assists, but he's definitely top 2 or 3 in assists. He's being asked to do it all and he's doing it all and they're winning games. I mean, they have a better record than Miami this season. I understand the Heat have been very injured for most of the season so far. But for me, Julius Randle, if we're looking at just this season, not going back to the bubble, not going back to last year, not going back to the fact that he made the finals, I do think just this year, Julius Randle is having the better season. And I definitely think he deserved to be an all-star. If I were to replace Bam Adebayo with anybody, I would replace him with Domantas Sabonis. But again, though, Sabonis is having a really solid season. And you look at their stats, they're nearly identical. Yep. And again, team record, if we want to talk about, who's winning more, an identical record almost. I think it's 1 or 2 games apart. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's a toss-up with Bam. I think he is a better defender. You're right. But if we're looking at just this season, the Julius Randle argument, I think, favors Julius Randle. He's having a better individual season than Bam is this year.
Yeah, that's a fair. I mean, that's a fair argument. I think that it's so close, Trevor, with a lot of
It
these
is.
numbers
It
with
is
these
really
players.
close.
Yeah, it really comes down to personal preference, and to me, that means that they got it pretty right. I mean, I don't have too many complaints. I wanted to say one more thing, Trevor, if you don't mind, before we move on
Go
from this
ahead. No, go
topic, and
ahead.
you can comment on this if you'd like. But I want to talk
Mhm.
about people saying Trae Young's a snub, and I just want to point out that I don't think he's a snub at all. And here's why. His team is sliding. They're losing a lot of games. They fired their
They
coach
are.
just yesterday, Trevor. He's not shooting very well from the floor, 43% from the floor, actually a little under that. So he's shooting worse from the floor than last year. He's
Mhm.
shooting 46% from inside the 3-point line, 37% from the 3-point line. His
Mhm.
percentages aren't very good. He's turning the ball over, 4.5 turnovers a game. I'm just not a fan of it. I'm just not a fan of it. And he's a terrible, terrible, terrible defender. He has not made any steps, any progress on that end of the floor. And I need to see some, Trevor. I need to see some from a guy like him. He needs to play a little bit of defense if this team wants to take a step forward. And until he does that or shoots more efficiently, I don't see where this team goes. And I also don't see how he deserves to make an All-Star game. So I just don't really like when people, say that he's a snub, because I feel like he's so inefficient that people forget, his percentages, because he's such a flashy player that people can be deceived by, like, deep threes or flashy passes. And
Right.
I don't think he deserves it. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll just briefly talk about Trae Young. I agree with you. I don't think he was a snub this year. There's definitely an argument for him to make the All-Star team, but I look at the guards slash forwards that made it over him in the East, and these are the reserves, right?
Mm,
Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, James Harden, Zach LaVine,
yeah.
and Ben Simmons. I mean, who are you going to replace Trae Young with? You could argue Ben Simmons, but I mean, as you mentioned, Ben Simmons is an elite defender.
Yeah.
He's also a guy that gives you not only scoring, but he gives you a lot of assists and a lot of rebounds. And he's on the number one seed in the East right now.
Yep.
So I agree with you. I don't think Trae Young deserved it over any of the guys I just listed. There's an argument for him, but there's an argument for a lot of guys that got, so-called snubbed. And I do think outside of the Chris Paul situation and getting Devin Booker in, that for the most part, the All-Stars were pretty accurate this year.
Yeah, no, I do agree with that, and I think that I'm glad they got it pretty right this year, Trevor. Personally, but Trevor, I think with that, unless you have any final thoughts, we can move on to our final section of today's podcast, which is just talking
Mm-hmm.
briefly about two teams, one each that we think are notable from this past few weeks of the NBA
Mm-hmm.
season. And Trevor, if you don't mind, I'm going to start real quick and talk
Go ahead.
about my team, the Denver Nuggets. And here's the reason I want to talk about the Nuggets. They're finally coming on and playing stronger as the season goes on. They started off slowly, Trevor. They were below 500 for a while. They were outside of the
Mm-hmm.
top 8 for a while, but they finally arrived. They've won a few games in a row. They've won 6 of their last 10. They're now the 7 seed in the West, and I think they will continue their rise all the way to a top 4 seed again. And I just wanted to throw around a few numbers about this team that I'm encouraged by. One being they're shooting the three ball very, very well. They're fifth in the league in 3-point percentage at about 39%. That's very good. That's very, very good. And I think a big part of that has to do with Michael Porter Jr. Emerging as a third scoring threat for this team. And they're also
Absolutely.
the fourth highest scoring offense overall, Trevor, scoring about 116 points a game. So they're putting up numbers on the offensive end, and they're holding opposing teams to 111 points per game, which is 11th fewest in the NBA. So they're playing well on both ends of the floor, both scoring and preventing teams from scoring. So that's encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
It's what I've seen from Denver the last few years. It's what I expected. But you never know. A team like them, they gave it all in the bubble, right? And we talked about, would they feel the effects? Would some teams feel the effects of having a shortened offseason? And I think they did at the start. I think they felt that a little bit. They got off to a slower start, kind of got back into the swing of things, and now they're going to start pouring it on come the second half. So I just wanted to mention some numbers about why I'm encouraged by them and why I think they'll be a top half team in the West.
I agree with you. At the beginning of the season, I think I had Denver as the 3 or 4 seed in my Western Conference standings, along with Utah and the LA teams. We'll see if they can get to the top 4. There's one team in mind, Phoenix Suns right now. They're in the top 4. Just wanted to throw that out there once
For now.
again. I think Denver will go as far as their third scoring option, and that's Michael Porter. If Michael Porter can play at the level he's been playing at for most of this season, just to pull up some stats on him, Denver's going to be a tough out. because we know what Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic can do, right? I mean, they're both studs, particularly Nikola Jokic, who is just absurdly good at basketball. And I look at Michael Porter this season, he is shooting very efficiently, 49% from the field, 40% from three. He's averaging about 14, 15 a game, which isn't bad. I think that's going to go up a little bit in the second half of the season. So for me, if he can keep shooting at the percentage he's shooting at, and you have Jamal Murray, Nikola Jokic, Paul Millsap, they'll get back in a few games. They have some other defensive guys like Monte Morris, Will Barton. This is a well-constructed Denver roster, and there's a reason they made the Western Conference Finals last year. We'll see. They are 19-15. The Western Conference is a gauntlet. Will they get to the top four? I don't know, but here's the thing, Ryan. Being in the top four won't matter that much. I think because there's a good chance that stadiums won't be full. You never really know. I mean, come playoff time, when the playoffs start in late May, you never really know what COVID's going to look like. But I guess for right now, let's just assume that stadiums aren't going to be full. Home crowd won't be that big of an advantage. So for me, what it's all about right now for Denver is getting top six. That way you avoid the play-in game. You're in the playoffs. And I think Denver can beat anybody. We saw it last year. They came back 3-1 twice. Jamal Murray had a breakout playoffs in the bubble. Michael Porter Jr. showed flashes. Jeremy Grant showed flashes. He's not there anymore. But you're right. Denver's a dangerous team. And I've talked about this off air with you. As a Phoenix Suns fan, I don't want to play them in the first round of the playoffs. Mm-hmm. I would much rather see a Portland or a San Antonio or Golden State. I do not want to play Denver. I think they're a scary team. They have an elite player, Nikola Jokic. They have an elite scorer in Jamal Murray. And if Michael Porter can become that third scorer, this is going to be a very, very tough team to beat. They have length, they have offense, and they have defense, as you mentioned. And I think they're going to be a tough out in the playoffs.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I agree. I think they're going to be tough out in the playoffs, although I just don't think they're going to make it to the Western Conference Finals. Or at least I don't think they'll make it to the NBA Finals. I just don't see them getting
I don't either. They're not winning the West.
Yeah, I don't see them getting that final jump, but they're definitely a formidable team, and they will be for a while. But, Trevor, I want to move on to the final team on this podcast, a team that you want to talk about, the team that's far and away, record-wise, the best team in the NBA, Trevor. And tell us about the Utah Jazz. What's going on with them?
What's going on with them, Ryan? You're not gonna expect what I have to say.
Oh boy.
The Utah Jazz are this year's example of the NBA regular season fool's gold. This team will not win the West. I will bet my life savings on it. And they might not even make the Western Conference Finals. They got a very dangerous first round opponent right now. If I'm a Utah fan and I told you your first round playoff series is going to be Golden State, Dallas, Denver, how would you feel? I would feel nervous. And I'm telling you, this Utah team is not that good. They are very well coached, don't get me wrong, and they are a great defensive team. Yeah. But when teams like the Lakers and the Clippers and the Nuggets, as you mentioned, when these teams decide to try come playoff time on defense, it's going to look a lot different. Utah is a great regular season story. I love Donovan Mitchell. Rudy Gobert is nice. They're getting some great production out of guys like Bogdanovich, Royce O'Neal, Mike Conley, good role players. But this is not a championship team. This is a good regular season team. And if I'm a Phoenix Suns fan right now and I see these guys in the second round of the playoffs, I like my chances. I'm not saying we beat them, but this Utah team to me is nothing special. They're this year's version of the 62-20 Atlanta Hawks that I think this was 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah.
With Kyle Korver, Al Horford, they go 62-20. They win the East, and they get swept in the Eastern Conference Finals to LeBron's Cavaliers. So don't believe in Utah. Don't bet on them to win the West. They're a great regular season story, but they are only that, and their peak will be the Western Conference Finals if they even get there. Ryan, all you.
Wow, yeah. So, to me, these are some bold statements, Trevor, you're having. And let me tell you this, from a pure number standpoint, I think you couldn't be more wrong if I'm looking at pure numbers. Right now, Trevor, the Utah Jazz are number 2 in the NBA in offensive rating, number 3 in defensive rating. They are also number 1 in three-pointers attempted. They take a lot of threes. They don't take a lot of twos. They're dead last in the league in two-pointers attempted, number 1 in three-pointers attempted.
Teams are going to get ran off the three-point line.
They take a lot of threes, but the thing is, Trevor, they do it efficiently. They're shooting 40% from three. That's third in the NBA this year.
It's not going to continue.
they're scoring a lot. They're defending the ball well. They score 10 more points per game than they give up. I mean, their margin of victory is 10 points on the year, Trevor. I mean, they're not even close on the season. And they run teams off the 3-point line. Speaking of that, Trevor, they're second in 3-pointers allowed, second fewest with only 31 allowed, and they take 42 themselves. And fifth lowest 3-point percentage allowed at 35%, Trevor. So they don't allow a lot of threes, and they don't allow them to go in the basket very often. And I'm just in almost every category on both sides, Trevor. They're fantastic. I mean, like the only places they struggle are passing the ball on offense and steals on the defensive end. They're really, I mean, they're sort of an ISO team on offense, but they make their shots. They know what they're good at, and they play elite defense in every facet of the game. And, I just think this team is a really, really formidable force this year. I think Jordan Clarkson's finally having a decent year, playing efficiently off the bench. And this team's just meshing really well. I do agree with you, though. Come playoff time, Trevor, this team will not make the NBA Finals. I am not sold on them come playoff time. And the reason is, as I say this every time, Trevor, you need playoff experience. And the problem with the Utah Jazz is they haven't gotten over that last hump. They haven't gotten over that last, roadblock. They haven't won that playoff series. They were close. Do you remember they were close to beating, I believe it was Denver, right? In the
they were 3-1. Yeah.
They were so close. They needed to win that series, Trevor, for me to have some confidence in them coming into the season. But I think this is the season they break through. I think this is the season they make the Western Conference Finals. They play the Los Angeles Lakers in the Western Conference Finals and lose. But this is where they finally break through and nearly make it to the NBA Finals. I think this team is for real, but I think LeBron is too much for them to handle and AD. So I don't think they'll make the finals, but I do think they're legit.
I want to talk about one more thing, and this is also a huge reason why Utah has been winning, and that's because they're staying healthy. I mean, I look at every team below them in the standings right now. I can think of a key player who's been injured for a couple games on every single one of these teams. Right, the Lakers don't have Anthony Davis. The Clippers are going to do their resting thing with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. Yeah. My Phoenix Suns have missed role player after role player, even missed CP3. They've missed D-Book a couple times. And if I'm a Utah fan, I love, and this is Utah every year though. Utah overachieves in the regular season. This is nothing new for me. This year they're doing it better than they have in the past. But as you said, Ryan, they don't win in the playoffs, and there's a reason why. Talent will win in the playoffs, and this Utah roster is not that great of a roster. It's well constructed and it meshes well, as you said, but that's a regular season roster. Right? There's one elite player on that team, Donovan Mitchell, and the rest of it is a bunch of good role players. The Lakers got 2 top 5 players in the NBA. The Clippers have 2 of the best wing players in the NBA. The Denver Nuggets have 2 elite players. Yeah. The Portland Trailblazers, when healthy, have multiple elite players. So for me, Utah is the Atlanta Hawks of 2011,
2015.
2015, okay, 2015.
Yes.
So it's a great regular season story. They're going to win the West in the regular season, I think, only because the Lakers and the Clippers don't really care about the regular season all that much. That's been proven. But don't believe in this team. They're going to play Golden State or Dallas first round, and that series will go 6 or 7 games.
And they will beat them.
If I'm a Utah fan and I have to see the Phoenix Suns in round 2, I'm not feeling good about my chances.
Okay. Well, Trevor, I think with that, we can wrap up this podcast with that. Trevor thinks the Utah Jazz will lose to the Phoenix Suns come playoff time, whereas I think the Utah Jazz will roll over the Phoenix Suns in 5.
I do have a little fun fact to close out the podcast. Whenever you're done, Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, no, of course. Let's hear it.
It's not really much of a fun fact. It's more of a warning. The NBA, you are being put on notice. You have once again gotten it wrong with this guy right here, Devin Booker of the Phoenix Suns. Oh my God. He went for 43 last night. And when he gets in the playoffs, he's going to be a problem. Mark my words, the Phoenix Suns with Devin Booker, an angry Devin Booker, are not going to be an easy out. And I'm calling it right now. If we get Utah in the second round, that 4-1 matchup, we're winning that series. This is a Western Conference Finals team. We have a better roster. Devin Booker is better than Donovan Mitchell, no ifs, ands, or buts. And I'm warning the rest of the NBA. You have gotten this wrong 2 years in a row. You have snubbed Devin Booker. You have created a monster that you will not be able to contain come playoff time. And I am eager to watch my Phoenix Suns get in this postseason and wreak havoc on the rest of the NBA. Dark horse Western Conference champions, the Phoenix Suns.
Wow. I mean, that's a bold prediction. We don't have time for me to debate this, but I assure you, folks, we will.
I saved it for the end for a reason.
Yeah, we will talk about this next week because I could not disagree more. But with that, Trevor, we will conclude this podcast number 40, and we will be back next week with another podcast talking more about NFL free agency upcoming, talking more about March Madness coming up and the end of college basketball season, and talking about this ludicrous Phoenix Suns to the Western Conference Finals prediction. But Trevor, we will see them all next week, and hope you guys enjoyed.